Order the open meeting for Thursday, August 4th, 2022, and ask the Commission Secretary for information on today's agenda.
Each commissioner has independently reviewed the minutes of the open meeting of Thursday, July 21st, 2022, and each has informed me there is no need to discuss the minutes.
Move we approve the minutes of Thursday, July 21st, 2022.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Each commissioner has independently reviewed the agenda, and each has informed me there is no need to discuss the notices associated with agenda items 2 through 18, or the suggested minute associated with agenda item 19, opening a rulemaking docket and accepting a statement of scope for submission to the governor's office, and directing commission staff to prepare and transmit the necessary documents to the governor's office, and directing that if the governor approves the statement of scope, commission staff is to prepare and submit the necessary documents to the Legislative Reference Bureau for publication in the Wisconsin Administrative Register and concurrently to the Department of Administration.
Move we approve the notices of investigation associated with agenda items 2 through 12.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Move we approve the notices of proceeding associated with agenda items 13 through 18.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
For agenda item 19, docket 1AC 258, I move that we open a rulemaking and have commission staff submit the appropriate submittal to the requisite agencies. Docket 1AC, did I say docket 1AC 258? Say it again.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, that brings us to our one and only item for discussion today. It's agenda item 20, docket 5-FE-104. And Commissioner Huebner is leading the discussion today.
All right. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Docket 5 FE 104. This is phase 2 of our Focus on Energy and Energy Efficiency Programs quadrennial planning process number 4. Just a brief history. We started this docket in March of 2020. A potential study was finalized in September of 2021. A rooftop solar PV potential study was completed in October of 2021. We did a scoping process, and the order for that went out in December of 2021. And then we took up phase 1 in April of this year, and now here we are at phase 2. So this is a very lengthy and organized process, and I want to first thank staff. I thought, number one, this process overall, up to this point, but specifically this memo and the work done to prepare, I thought was outstanding. A really good job of laying out a lot of different complex and interrelated things. I also want to thank the 16 organizations and individuals who submitted comments in this round. I found all of them extremely helpful and valuable in looking at these different issues from different perspectives. So I don't know if either of you have any other opening remarks before we dive into the myriad of decisions to make today.
I do not.
Okay, Commissioner. Good. Okay. So in addition to the memo, at the back of the memo was an attachment C, and I'm going to be kind of working off of that, although we may have to jump back into the memo itself at times. So the first decision item for us is related to how to state the energy savings goals. Historically, or at least for the last quad, we have had an overall MMBTU savings goal with minimum performance requirements thresholds for both kilowatt hours on the electric side and for therm savings on the natural gas side. The options in front of us are to continue that with either 90 or 80 or 75% minimum thresholds, or to remove the kilowatt hour and therm specific thresholds, or to not do MMBTU and keep the kilowatt and therm. On this, based on the discussion, I was at alternative 1. I would continue to keep the MMBTU savings goal, and I thought that having minimum performance requirements thresholds is important, although I would lower that. So I would be supportive of either sub-alternative B or C, either setting that at 80% or 75%, and that was just from the discussion of the last quad related to some of the challenges of meeting certain things. Numerous commenters thought we should just remove the kilowatt hour and therm. I was persuaded by our customer groups both saying they find value in that because you've got gas customers paying in, you've got electric customers paying in. There needs to be some minimum threshold to avoid cross-subsidization. So that was my thinking coming in. So Alt 1, and then I guess I would lean towards sub-alternative B, but I'm okay with sub-alt C. Madam Chair.
Okay, I was actually at Alt 2. I was convinced that establishing the overall MMBTU goal without the KWH and the therm MPRs allowed the program administrator a little more flexibility. And I did appreciate comments that we received that were in support of going that route. So I was at alternative 2.
Okay, Commissioner Noack.
Thanks. I'm at alternative 1. My initial position is at sub-alternative A, maintaining the 90% threshold. We deviated last year. I think that was largely due to the pandemic and other issues. So, you know, it's worked well prior to the pandemic. I think it's good to hold those NPRs higher. I think that because of the value to the customers, it's more important to do that. And, you know, there's a lot of, throughout the day, or I think hopefully not day, but hour, we're going to talk about giving. I know. You never know. You never know. Talk about giving more flexibility and doing more studies and stuff. And I think that's good in some circumstances, but it's important too for us and our staff to continue to keep a little more oversight as we move through this. So that's why we can come back and you know, if you're gonna stay at your other ones, but I would prefer to stay at 90 just because I think we only moved down to 80 because of the pandemic. And
Okay.
hope we don't have one again.
I mean, I can be flexible on this too, Madam Chair.
Yeah,
I
I'm
don't know
happy
if
to join you
have-
both at Alt 1. I think we should just then have a discussion in terms of do we keep it at
Yeah.
the 90% or do we lower it? And I guess I'm of the mind that if we're going to keep the status quo, then that should flow through to sub-alt A. So I would be at Alt 1 and then sub-alt A. So I don't think we should change it.
Okay.
And you were at sub-alt.
Yeah, I was thinking either B or C, so that would just lower it and create a little bit of extra flexibility.
Well, I'm at A, you're at A.
And you're at A, so
Yeah.
there's 2 votes.
There's 2 votes for A.
Okay.
Yeah. I was fine with removing them, but I think my default is then let's stay with where we are right now
Okay.
and see what that looks like.
Okay. Sounds good.
Will you join or will you dissent on this?
I can join that, that's fine. Yep. Okay, so item 2 is life cycle versus first-year savings goals. For this, there was not much contention on this. I'm at alternative 1 to continue with the life cycle goals. I did note that the industrial customers groups and some others' comments talked about some process-related improvements that are very cost-effective, but they only have shorter lifetimes. So we're not going to solve that if we stick with Alt 1, but I just want to note that there may be some savings opportunities out there that the program could be looking at along those lines. So, but with that, I'm at alternative 1.
I was there as well.
Yeah, I join you
Okay.
there.
So now on to emphasis between energy and demand. This is a decision that we make every time, and I think historically we've always been at emphasis on energy. In this particular memo, we have a couple options. One is to, alternative 2 would have us increase the program's emphasis on demand reduction, whereas alternative 1, if we go with sub-alternative A, would direct some additional research during Quad 4. I'm coming in at, I would like to see alternative 2, or that's where my initial thoughts are. I think that based on what we're seeing in the changing of the electric generation mix, having focus, really start now, looking at demand reduction and how energy efficiency can fit in with the overall supply of the state, as the memo says, taking on a larger role in ensuring capacity and reliability. So I would be at alternative 2, although I am also, if we don't land there, I'm also supportive of the sub-alternative A under Alt 1, so.
So that's where I landed, was at Alt 1 and Sub-Alt A. And the question I just kept asking myself was, are we far enough along in the process to be able to go with Alt 2? And the more that I read, the more I came down on the side of, I think we still need some more time. And I would be interested to see what the research is. I think the discussions that we've had thus far and the comments that we've received, frankly, is that it's likely going to make sense to start establishing goals based on peak demand reduction and really look at demand reduction. I don't feel comfortable that there's enough there. So I'm at Alt 1, Sub-Alt A.
Okay, Commissioner Nowak.
Yeah, because we don't have enough information yet to establish those goals, I couldn't go to alternative 2. I will join you at subalternative A, but this is one of the numerous places where we have performed research, and I just want to know, I guess we'll have to get a better sense of what that's going to entail. Will that take dollars from the prescriptive programs or otherwise? So I say yes to it in not knowing the price tag, so that I'd like to have, I guess it's, for me, a conditional yes, and would like to get, before that is embarked upon, I think we should be informed of what that's going to entail and how long it will take to do. And I think we should also keep in mind, and I think a couple commenters, and I know Franklin mentioned this, there are lots of buckets of, literally buckets of money from the federal government that we can chase after to maybe help do this. So we need to keep that in mind as we talk about doing some more of this research and stuff as well.
Yep. Okay, I'll join you both at then Alt 1, Sub-Alt A. So the next one is a somewhat related issue, and that's the time-varying value of energy efficiency. On this one, I was at alternative 1, which is to say, focus shall investigate opportunities to integrate the time-varying value of energy efficiency and renewable energy resources into program operations. I think that that's really important, and it's something that we talked about, or at least that I brought up in the last time we discussed this in phase 1, is looking at how the grid mix is changing and how focus then can be targeting the hours that are most valuable, which may be different than afternoon peak in the future, summer afternoon peak. So I think it's important to do that. On this, I was at subalternative A, and I'm also fine with subalternative C. So I mean, we'll talk about EERD later, but I think that that's, the type of funding, and historically EERD, we've sort of let the ideas come in, and we'll see where we land with our decisions today, but I think we've got maybe some more direction for that EERD going forward. This may be one of them. But to Commissioner Nowak's point, I think keeping subalternative A on the table, that if there's federal dollars or other dollars that can be used to do these types of research, that option should be on the table, and I know the staff will certainly be looking for that. So I'm at Alt 1, Subalts A and C
Okay.
as options. Okay.
I was also at Alt 1. I think it's important, and I think now is the time to look into this. I'm going to suggest, and it's sort of riffing off of what Commissioner Nowak said in the last decision, I'm going to suggest that for these ones that we are directing additional research to be done, that staff come back to us with budgets associated with those buckets. And it could be, it's not just the monetary aspect, it's also the time aspect. So it would be really helpful for me if after we get to our decision, staff can compile, okay, this is all the research that you all want. These are the associated dollars associated with all that research. And then that gives us an opportunity to look at it, and if it's that one of them falls out because of time or money, we can make that decision. But I would like to come back, especially this one, I would like to see what the budget is.
Great, sounds great.
Yeah, I was also alternative one, but I wrote down in my notes, without knowing the cost, I can't say where it should come from and when, just like the last one. And I think that, you know, can it be absorbed in the evaluator's cost as contract, or is that going to cause that to go up? Because this could impact the whole split between administration and what's paid out. So I think we need to know that before, sooner rather than later. So yes to this, but yeah, I agree with the chair. We need to have a comprehensive list of what it's going to take and the time, resource, money, and time. Yeah.
That sounds good. Okay. So next up is the winter peak electric period definition. The discussion about this was related to the expectation that winter electric peaking is going to become more important. And specifically, I think there's a discussion about how MISO has proposed, it's not been yet approved, but has proposed to move to what they call a seasonal resource adequacy approach. So on this, again, I think this is important. I mean, this is I see, you know, this as a period of transition. This is another thing to add to the list of the discussion we've just had, but I do think it's important to look at this. So I was at alternative one, to adopt a winter peak and begin to quantify and track those goals in Quad 4. So using this as a transition period, but saying, yes, this is important. Chair Bach?
I agree with you. I was at the same spot, Alt 1.
Yeah, I think we should start tracking that as well. I'm on alternative one.
Okay. The next one is peak natural gas, and it's somewhat related to the last discussion. In that it's kind of the same thing, is what are the peaks on the coldest winter days, and is there a value to avoiding those with natural gas savings? I was at alternative one on this, which is to, again, start to adopt a winter peak natural gas definition and quantify and track it. I know that there's work that would need to be done to get there, so I would add this under sub-alt A, that the evaluation working group would investigate and develop recommendations for us. Chair Bach?
Yeah, and I think that's sort of the same as waiting for that foundational work to occur, right? I mean, so my initial reaction was, I'm at Alt 1. But then I was thinking, well, do we ask the IOUs to coordinate, or do we wait until foundational work can occur? And I think in my mind, we should wait for that foundational work to occur before we loop in the IOUs. So I would join you at that sub-alt A.
Okay. Chair Noack, or Commissioner Noack.
Yeah, I think
Sorry.
I can join you at Alt 1 and sub-Alt A, and with the knowledge that this is that info gathering stage, and they will come back. Nothing in the program goals yet. You know, if it involves reaching out to the IOUs, it may involve that. I don't know that we have to, you know, you were talking about alternative B. They still, you know, that might be part of the info gathering. It doesn't have to be part of that statement, so it could be part of it.
Okay?
Okay, so emphasis between business and residential programs. There seem to be, I think, near consensus that we should stick with alternative one from the commenters, and I'm at that, alternative one. Continue to do 60% business, 40% residential.
I am in the same place, Alt 1.
I agree.
Okay, resource acquisition and market transformation. I thought this discussion was really, really good and helpful. This is basically the balance between how much we're going after savings with incentives today versus the activities related to kind of building markets that could be working with, installers, working with retailers that stock to make sure they have the stock of certain equipment so that when a customer comes to the store or calls their contractor, there's actually, something available. I know some of the midstream program that we're working on is related to that. I personally think that this is important. I would be at Alt 2 on this. In fact, I think this is one of the more important ones of the decisions, in my view, for today. And that would be increasing the program's emphasis on market transformation. Certainly, we're going to continue emphasizing the near-term savings as we have done. But as I think about, and as the commenters and as the discussion of this memo talks about the different markets that are coming up, I think that there's a value in spending more time figuring out how to build those markets for the next, 5 and 10 and 15 years, especially now that Focus itself has matured so much and has reached its 20-year goals. So with that, I would be at alternative 2. I think that there's a little bit of work to do here, so I do support, I think, subalternative B, which is figuring out, what that market transformation potential looks like. I did note on the industrial customer groups don't support this. They want to continue focused on immediate savings, and that made me wonder if some of the market transformation is a little bit segmented between maybe C&I versus residential, where residential, there's talk of heat pumps. There may be other markets, especially now that lighting has kind of run its course, that maybe there's a little more emphasis on residential with this market transformation work, but that there may be efforts in C&I as well. So those were some of the thoughts I had. As far as Subalt A specific heat pump adoption target, I guess my thoughts on that is it would be interesting to see what that goal is, if staff could develop that. And then we could still decide whether we want to adopt it in our final decision in phase 3. But I guess that's where I'll leave that one. I don't know. Curious to see both of your thoughts. So pass it to you, Chair Vach.
Okay, so I'm at Alt 2. I think it's an important step, but it's incremental enough. Where we're not abandoning the near-term savings, and we recognize the value that plays. But when you look at the adoption, especially in the LED market share, that is market transformation, right? And so I think that's an important part of the programming. Where I landed was I actually was in favor of Subalt B because I don't want us to only focus on one type of technology.
Yeah.
I think we should continue to be technology agnostic. And the fact that Slipstream has that heat
Right.
pump study that we approved as part of EIGP, I think as long as we ensure that any assessment under Subalt B is not duplicative of what we've already funded for
Yeah.
Slipstream,
Right.
I would support that because I do think it needs to be more focused on everything that's out there, and I don't feel comfortable just honing in on one particular piece of technology.
Okay. Commissioner Nowak.
Yeah, I'm at alternative 1. To me, this is, as you said, it's fundamental. I think it's a fundamental. What is the purpose of the program? And I think going to alternative 2 starts to turn focus to me more into we're trending too much into what is a research program that takes money away from incentives, because we have to research this, we have to do market incentives, and more even fundamentally is the goal of focus to respond to what the market's saying, or is it to push a market? And I just fundamentally believe that, I'm not the biggest fan of incentives in the first, I don't think government should be starting to say, we're going to try to get the society to move towards this sector. It should be more responsive to what the people want and consumers versus us sitting here picking which technologies we want to move forward because we think they're the best for society. We don't know. So I think we should continue to emphasize near-term savings. That's going to get the most bang for the buck. I think it will also, this is going to have an impact moving away from that on the cost effectiveness of the program. And so I cannot join you at alternative 2. I'm at alternative 1.
No, I appreciate you kind of illuminating your thoughts, and this is, there's different, obviously, schools of thought, and yours is completely valid. I think the way I'm kind of looking at it is, it feels like for like the residential, we've kind of hit maybe a little bit of a gulf, and that we've really focused on lighting, and now lighting is basically exhausted, and maybe we didn't do enough to figure out what's next, because it feels like maybe there's a little gap between lighting and what's next. So my thought with this is, again, as you said, Chair Bach, we continue to emphasize near-term savings, but increase the emphasis with the goal of trying to steady this out as technologies come and go over 5 and 10 and 15-year periods. So I was at Alt 2, and I'll join you. I was at Sub-Alt B, and then Sub-Alt A does not have 2 votes, so we'll move on. Cost effectiveness primary test. I thought this was a good discussion. There wasn't actually a lot of people, I don't think, that weighed in on this one as much with the comments, but some of them that did talked about sort of the regulatory view test that's happening in Minnesota. I think that's really an interesting and maybe new approach, but I think that's one that's going to take time and effort and stakeholder process. That I feel like where we're at today, the modified TRC is approximating that well enough for us. So I was essentially at the status quo and continuing to use the modified TRC, and that would be Alt 1.
I was
So-
at the same spot, Alt 1.
Okay.
Yeah, there wasn't enough, one, in comparing year over year comparisons,
Yes,
that's helpful to
also
maintain
valuable.
it. But also, there just wasn't, I think, an argument presented why what we've been doing has been inaccurate.
Right.
So
Yep.
I'll stick with the modified TRC.
Okay, and then the secondary tests, my approach on this was to continue doing what we are doing, and my understanding of that is that we are calculating all the tests enumerated in A through F, but not under G, and that's on page 70 of the memo. So continuing to do the TRC, we've got the modified, obviously, as our primary, but doing the expanded, that includes the economic benefits, the utility view, the societal view, the ratepayer view. I thought all of those are valuable, so that's where I was as secondary. These are additional for informational purposes, so.
So A through G?
No, I wouldn't include G. I don't think we're doing that now. But my understanding is we are calculating A through F today.
Okay. I was at Alt 1. Initially, I was the most interested in the utility cost test and the societal cost test. I think maybe I didn't realize that we were doing all of these sort of on the side.
Yeah.
I mean, I think they add value, but to me, the ones that add the most value are the utility cost test and the societal cost test.
Okay.
Yeah, we're doing a lot of them, as you can see, and I think we should narrow it down to the tests that really only help direct programs or manage programs. And so, based on my conversations, certainly the expanded TRC is something that's used by our staff and the administrator to help guide the direction of the programs. And the utility cost test, I understand, is useful in that. And those were the only two. While it may not be the largest expenditure of resources, I still think we should start to simplify and really only spend have them spend the time on things that are most useful in management of the program. The societal cost test, I understand, is more used for, third parties to use, and if they would like to do something like that, they're free to do that on their own. It's not something that is used in management and direction of the program. So I'm at alternative 1 with just C and D.
Okay. And Chair Bach, you're at D and E?
Correct.
Okay. Well, I would vote to include C and D and E.
Okay.
So that gives us 2 votes on those 3.
Yep.
And it sounds like there's only 1 vote for F. That's me,
Yep.
unless anybody wants to look at the ratepayer test.
I can join you both in continuing to use C.
Okay,
So I would be for C, D, and E.
all right.
Yeah, I'll be a no on E.
Okay. Okay.
And is there another vote for the ratepayer impact test? Not right now.
No,
Okay.
right now.
All right, moving on to low income. I thought this was a really good discussion. In the Phase 1 memo, I thought our staff did an excellent job of framing up a very important reminder that in the state of Wisconsin, we have a completely separate ratepayer-funded low-income weatherization program that's one of the best in the country and one of the best, most well-funded in the country, and is distinct from the focus on energy programming and work. We did encourage them to work more closely with them in Phase 1. So the question here is, how should the cost effectiveness of programming for low-income and income-qualified programs be conducted? I thought it was a very interesting discussion. I think the staff's concern in the memo about just excluding it. So other states and utilities are just excluding this and saying, you know, it's important to serve those customers, but we're not going to have that negatively impact the overall portfolio. And so that's an approach some other states and utilities have taken. It seemed like our staff was concerned about that approach. So I think that the alternative 3 approach is a reasonable one, which is to say that it would be continued to be calculated for cost effectiveness, but there would be a benefits adder described, and that could be related to the health and safety of the customers. Another one that came up when we were doing COVID dockets is related to reducing arrearages, so that would be one that could be looked at, I think, is if we can keep people paying their bills on time because their bills are lower. That may be a benefit, obviously, to them, but to all customers. So I was fine with the benefits adder approach and would be at Alt 3. Chair Bach.
Okay, I think the code is pretty explicit in that we cannot exclude the programs in terms of how we calculate their cost effectiveness. So I was actually at Alt 4 because I thought that that was consistent with the guidance that we gave in Phase 1, and it really fills in the gaps of what's being done at DOA. So I was at Alt 4.
Okay, Commissioner Noack.
Yeah, I agree. We have to include that. I don't think statutorily we can include it, which is why we do a portfolio. It has to pass that portfolio-wide test, not program cost effectiveness. And we know that some programs continually will be not cost effective or will not be cost effective. But I wasn't convinced that we should add a benefits adder. I think that it clouds what's actually happening. We need to bring, I think, transparency to this. And we've accepted, we know that some programs won't be cost effective.
Yeah.
So why are we then putting an adder on it? There are some benefits, I think, that we can't, it's like they're there, but we don't know how, and it's like, well, that's too obtuse, and we should assign something because there must be something there. Well, that's not a very scientific way to go about things. So the benefits adder, again, I think it just arbitrarily inflates the effectiveness of the program and really doesn't then get to, I would rather have more time focused on why isn't something as cost effective? And let's get to the root of that problem versus having a cost benefit ratio look better? Like, what can we do to help that cost effectiveness rather than put an adder on it? So I'm at alternative 5. We should not be. Plus, it also, now this is going to start to, we're going to have asterisks looking at year over year, or take it off when we look at year over year program and compare from year to year, because we haven't done this before.
Right.
So I'm at alternative 5.
Okay. I'd like to just come back, put a pin in that one and come back to it.
Okay.
Okay. Different spots. Just one sec. Okay. So moving on to avoided costs. I think there's 4 in a row here related to the various avoided costs. The first one is electric avoided energy costs. Most of the stakeholders were supportive of alternative 1. Clean Wisconsin brought up the idea of time differentiated peaks. I thought that was interesting, but on balance, I'm going to be at alternative 1 on this, given, I think that that's interesting. I think we're going to do a little bit on time varying, as we talked about earlier. That may inform that idea, but given where we're at and the importance of other issues, I think just sticking with status quo is fine.
I agree. I
Okay.
was also at alt 1.
I agree.
Okay. The next item is avoided electric capacity costs. On this, I was also at alternative 1. Chair Vach.
I was actually at alt 2 for this one. I think it's important for us to look at baseload and intermediate capacity, as was described, and so I was at alternative 2.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm at
can
alternative 1.
You're at alt 1?
Yep.
Okay. Sorry. Just one second. Okay. Yeah, I think I'm okay with alternative 1. I think that this issue, well, we're looking at this issue in 5 other dockets as well, so it doesn't end, but I'm going to be okay with alt 1 on that.
Okay?
Okay. So next up is avoided T&D costs, and for this, I was actually at alternatives 1 and 2, which is to say I don't know that how, there's missing information. There's certainly a gap in calculating all these costs, and that was noted in the staff memo. I think that it's important for us to try to peel that one back, but I'm not sure how important it is to do that right away. And so I was thinking we should continue with the status quo, but sometime in quad 4, depending, as you mentioned earlier, Chair Vach, there's sort of a list here of maybe work to be done, and we should figure out where this fits in that prioritization. So I was at maintaining the status quo, but also directing them to work on that, but I don't think it's as urgent as some of the other things. Chair Vach.
Is this the one where one of the commenters said, come up with an alternative method, but don't have the EWG do it? Like a third party?
I think to have like RAP do it,
Yeah.
maybe.
Yeah.
I can look back at
I
that.
found that to be a good suggestion. I agree with you. There's clearly a lack of publicly available data in order to
Yeah.
calculate avoided T&D costs. But that's not to say that the data doesn't exist. It's just, it's a matter of getting to it. And so I think your approach of maintaining the current approach, but then also directing that an alternative method be presented to us. And I, like I said, I found the suggestion to use a third party to make a lot of sense.
Yeah,
So,
I can join that.
okay.
Sounds good. Commissioner Nowak.
Yeah, I mean, this evaluator is clear, the staff is clear. You guys just said the current method we have is flawed, so I think we should not continue to do it now. I mean, it doesn't make sense to continue to use something that has bad data. I'm I'm fine with looking to see if there are, but I don't want to start with the assumption that there are avoided T&D costs. I think the research should explore if there are any and what that cost is. And I don't, I think they should come back to us, whether it's RAP, whether it's our evaluator, whoever. Maybe the value comes back and it's zero or de minimis. But I think for now, so I was at, I think, just alternative 2.
Okay.
And we should not maintain the current approach, which is flawed.
Okay. I will stay where I am.
Just was clarifying then the alternative 2, if I hear it, that should be presented
Yes.
during the quad 4, but not necessarily used in evaluating in quad 4. It will be used evaluation in the future.
I think that's correct.
And-
It would depend on how
When we
quickly or
decide.
easily
Yeah.
data could be identified.
And then a third party or EWG or,
Yeah, I think that, consistent with the chair's discussion earlier, I think there's a variety of research tasks, so staff can work to develop that, and maybe they can
I think that's
identify
kind
a
of,
third party. Yeah,
implicit in all the different research projects.
yeah,
Yeah, so,
sounds good.
and then I have you dissenting, Commissioner Nowak on all one.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so moving on to avoided natural gas costs. I thought this was an interesting set of comments related to this because both the industrial customer group and Clean Wisconsin suggested modifying this and using what they call NYMEX for the first 3 years and then the longer-term forecast. The idea there being trying to capture some of the near-term price realities that we've seen in the natural gas market with prices kind of rising dramatically, but those long-term forecasts really don't catch that. So I'm open to that idea for an alternative method on this. I think, again, it falls into the how critical is this and where does it fit in the priority. I think the status quo is also okay, but I think that their points are valid, that it might be time to look at balancing that near-term actual price with the forecast. So I'm kind of at alternative 2 with, I'm at alternative 2 with the customer groups in Clean Wisconsin's suggestion to look at NYMEX in addition to. But I also am okay with alt 1.
Yeah,
So,
I was at alt 1. I think the current approach is reasonable, and so I was at alt 1.
Okay. Commissioner Nowak?
yeah, I'm going to stay with the status quo outline. The industrial consumer groups, and as you noted, CUB brought in some other viewpoints. I didn't think they made the case, though, that the status quo was inappropriate. And, the industrial energy groups have brought this forward before.
Yeah.
And it would have a substantial outcome difference on the cost effectiveness. And again, then we get back into year over year, and if there's a reason to change, we'd do it. I just don't think they made the case well enough to change it. They're different forecasts, they're different ways to look at it. So I'm going to stick with the status quo, alternative 1.
Okay. Sounds good. So I can dissent on that, although it's a soft dissent.
Noted
But I
in
thought they made
lowercase,
a,
Commissioner.
yeah. Noted what?
I'll note it in lowercase.
Okay. Okay. Next up is the value of carbon, which is part of the cost effectiveness calculation. So a good discussion from the staff memo here related to the history of this and the two kind of primary ways that we have looked at this in the past, as well as other states and jurisdictions and utilities. Those being either looking at it based on a market-based carbon value versus a societal cost of carbon. The memo describes how in the first quad, the commission basically sought to strike a balance between those two. In subsequent quads, the commission has chosen just a market-based. Very curious to see both of your thoughts on this. If we want to continue with a market-based price, I was thinking an average of the two major markets, the RGGI market and the California market, might be an approach that could be found reasonable if we want to do market-based. Chair Bach?
Yes, I am in favor of using a market-based carbon value. And I was actually at Alt 2 where I would ask the EWG to come with an updated market base that appears to be consistent with what has been done, as you noted, Commissioner Huebner, since the beginning. And so I think it's time to look at the updated number, and if $15 is still the updated number, then that's okay, but I think it makes sense to look at what would an updated market value be. So I'm at Alt 2.
Okay. Commissioner Noack?
Thanks. Yeah, I don't think we should set a market value on something we don't have a market for. There is no market for carbon in Wisconsin. So we're just then using other states that have vastly different rules and emissions and so forth than Wisconsin as a proxy. When we did this several years ago and we bumped it up, we were looking down at a clean power plan from the federal government that was going to require a carbon market. That's gone. There's no national market. There's no need for us to do it now. I think that if a market does then become something in Wisconsin, then we should set a price for it, but it's premature to set a price on something that there's no market for. So I'm at alternative 4 and setting it, I guess, either set the value at 0 or just not even setting one.
Right.
We have no basis for which to set one.
Okay, I'll join you at alternative 2, Chair, if you want to have the EWG come back to us. I think that is appropriate. I think that it's well established enough that there is a value, and the idea of the market value is just to approximate what that value is. So I will join you at
Alt 2.
that,
Okay.
Alt 2. Yep. Sorry, I'm looking back and forth between the memo and the summary.
Yeah.
Summary, or the memo has more expansive reading at times. Okay. So next up is discount rate. Again, an interesting discussion, some different proposals, but a number of folks either suggested or were fine with the status quo, maintaining a 2% discount rate. I think that remains appropriate in valuing the near term versus the long term as we look at these types of programs that save energy over the long term. So I was at Alt 2, a 2% discount rate. Chair Bach?
I was at Alt 2 as well.
Yeah, there was, have we seen with Cub and some other places wanting a different one or using a range, which they even admit is problematic. I think there's no perfect one. We can make arguments on different sides. I think 2 is something we've done for a while. It has proved valuable. I'll stick with that.
Okay. Okay, next. I think we're doing pretty good on time, folks. All right, so next up is renewable funding. So a couple different areas that we had previously carved out or to date have carved out funding for renewables, and then we'll talk about rural. I thought this was a really interesting discussion on both of these. I think that some of the commenters, talking about the flexibility and simplicity of, I know the local government groups kind of brought that up as their overarching theme. I thought WUA's comments, again, also were helpful and instructive in that, what did they have? Excuse me one second. Looking at setting outcome-based key performance indicators is more efficient than prescribing budget carve-outs, is the way that they described it. And I think the argument was made well enough, both in the memo and also hearing from the stakeholders, particularly Aptum, as the program administrator, the challenges that they have related to tracking all these budgets separately. So I talked with staff a lot about this because I was just really kind of curious with how this long list of sub-alternatives was developed. A number of stakeholders are are basically fine with alternative 4 and basically allowing renewables to just be in the mix as basically a core set of technologies and allocating funding as necessary to meet the commission's goals. The other alternative that I thought might make sense is related to moving to the KPI, a 4-year budget KPI. The one thing that I guess I was concerned about is the way the maximums that have been set up and how that's been translated into basically a contractual penalty. And that doesn't, I don't think that really makes sense because Aptum ends up tracking something else and having basically to underspend what the previous renewable budget had been set at because they're concerned about extending. The memo also talks about how some of the cost effectiveness has certainly come down as well. So I'm very curious to see what your thoughts are on this, but I am comfortable with either alternative 4 or moving to the alternative 3, a 4-year KPI. And if we did that, I would be looking at sub-alternative C and looking at a 4-year approach. My preference would be to basically replace the word maximum with like a target. So trying to set a budget that's about what we think should be spent, as opposed to this, maximum contract penalty situation that's been in place in the past. So with that, I also would be at sub-alt A, whatever we set the value at. I know there was discussion about the non-incentive costs. I thought Aptum's discussion was the most helpful in that they said, yeah, these are really estimates. We don't know what these non-incentive costs are. We're just allocating them, sort of a pro rata share. So it didn't seem appropriate to bring those into the discussion when they're not really clear what those are. So I think if we set either a budget or a KPI, sticking to the incentive and then understanding that there's some administrative costs, that's where I was coming in. So Chair Bach, I'll pass to you.
All right, so for this one, I was at alt 3.
Okay.
I would set a 4-year maximum. I would make it a maximum.
Okay.
I would set that maximum under sub-alt C at 22 million.
Okay.
And I would have that maximum budget just be for incentives only. And then those non-incentive costs are taken out of the efficiency budget. So I was at alt 3, sub-alt A, sub-alt C. And I think, as you indicated, there's generally consensus around the fact that using a KPI allows for maximum flexibility, and it appears to make it easier and also be able to be more responsive to where the programs should be.
Yeah.
So.
And I think it was Franklin Energy brought this up, and this was sort of a relic of the RECIP former program, but just some of these larger industrial renewable projects comes in, they're really large and they have big budgets, and then all of a sudden, if they get delayed by 2 months and they move from one year to the next, that it creates challenges managing year to year. So I appreciate I think the 4-year approach. So I can join you at that, Chair Nowak. Or sorry,
Commissioner,
second time. Commissioner Nowak, my fault.
you're living in the past, buddy. Okay, I think we should stick with an annual budget for this just because we have seen a tremendous drop in prices of, let's face it, most of the renewable program is for solar. And I am very curious about whether or not we even need to, what that level is and how much it should continue to be incentivized. Because I gotta get this whiplash of people want it, people want it, people want it, it's out there and it's growing, and then, we still have to incentivize it. So it's like pick one or the other. And I think that's why we should keep a closer eye on what that renewable budget is being used for every year and what those incentive levels are, because I think that might change a lot. And if we start to increase put more of the program, if it's 22 million over 4 years, that's an increase in the maximum amount of renewables that we've been doing. And that doesn't necessarily then translate into energy, using less KWH. Renewables doesn't mean efficient. It means it's just a different form. So that just goes to the fundamental, what do we want the purpose? Do we want to start to transform the purpose here of the program? So I would also then just keep all the administrative costs in the administrative bucket, not to separate that out. But I feel that we need to keep a yearly budget going on this, and that allows us to keep an eye on where the program dollars are going. So I'll be alternative 1, sub alternative A.
Okay. So I'll join with you, Madam Chair. So we would be at Alt 3, Sub-Alt A, and Sub-Alt C. And just to note, the $22 million that's listed there, I do think that's equivalent to the $5.5 million a year over 4 years. It just would set that at a 4-year, budget instead of year by year. So that was my understanding of that one. So
Yep.
just,
11 plus 11 is 22.
yeah. So it just, okay, so we're good on that. So next up is budgets for underserved and rural. So in the last quad, there was, again, a set aside a specific funding amount for rural. And some of that was funded out of the base budget, and some of that, at least for a few years of the quad, was carryover dollars from years and years ago that had been, at least initially, put into some rural programs and unallocated digester dollars. I thought, again, the argument about the flexibility and simplicity, and I was comfortable moving this to the KPI-based approach. So I would be supportive of a couple of things here. One would be related to Alt 3 and looking at this as underserved, and certainly including rural customers in that bucket, but making sure that we're looking also at the energy burdens. I think small business, both of those are fine and worthy of including. We know that a lot of, for example, rural customers, a lot of tribal customers have high energy burdens. So high energy burden doesn't mean it's not rural. We know some urban customers also have high energy burdens. So looking at that, I think, is important. But I also would support, and specifically because the staff has suggested coming back to us by March 31st of 2024 on that work, that in the interim, which is basically all of next year, we would do something. We would basically move this to the KPI-based approach to continue ensuring that, rural and underserved get served for 2023 in approximately the way that they've been served in the past. So that would be my approach, would basically be looking at like alternative 2. It's kind of like what we talked about earlier, alternative 2 for now, and getting more research and looking at this underserved more holistically with alternative 3. So that was my thinking on this. Pass to you, Chair Vach.
Yep, I was in the exact same spot, and I think you said it, and it bears repeating, that my question was, well, it's not either or, it's both and there are a number of customers with high energy burden living in rural areas. It's not a distinction between rural and urban. It's a distinction of who needs these incentives the most. And so I landed exactly where you were, and that is I have Alt 2 plus Alt 3, and then Sub-Alt A and B.
Okay.
Yeah, I think first we have to have a definition of what underserved is. Is it who doesn't participate, or who has a you know, more greater need for energy efficiency. That, to me, underserved is someone who doesn't have equal access to the programs. It's not ensuring equal participation, or because someone is of a certain income, they are underserved, even though they're still taking advantage of the program and the low-income program. It's, are we targeting them, and are we targeting tailoring programs that are necessary for them? And that's why a few years ago, when we said, we did an analysis and said, you know, it's not just the low participation rate in the rural areas, it was that the administrator wasn't marketing at the same equal level to them. And because it was obviously more cost effective to stay closer to the urban cities than to drive to rural parts of the states and do more marketing that way. So I think we've achieved our goal with reaching the rural areas again and creating that awareness of the program and creating programs such as the agricultural ones that are tailored to the needs of those sectors. So I think first there should be a definition of what is underserved. It's not lack of participation, it's lack of equal access. Because we can't force people to participate. So I was at alternative 3, and then just because it should be for everybody. So what I want to make sure is that the participation in the rural state, or the access to the program stays the same for all sectors, whether it's rural, small business, low income, you name it. We should be marketing equally among all sectors. So that's where I'd like to have some analysis done to go back and figure out what areas have we, I think, neglected in programmatic or marketing, if there are any. And then we can develop where to go from there.
Right.
So
So
I'm at alternative 3.
you join us on alt 3,
Yeah,
and then what would you do in the
In the interim.
interim?
yeah. Well, that's where I wish we could, you guys are at alt 2?
For the interim, right, which
Yep.
is just recognizing what you just said, which is the table on, I was looking back, sorry, I was flipping pages on page 121, where it shows how, you know, progressively year over year, the percentage of spend in rural is matching up with the percentage of customers, you know, about
Yeah.
36% each.
They have a high
So my
participation rate.
my thinking with alternative 2 is that the KPI aims to continue that trend, which is to say the rural customers would get equal access as we have achieved, and making sure that that continues
Yeah, and that's
up
what-
until
Right.
a
that's
new
when
definition
I
is.
had,
yep.
I said, I want to make sure that continues. I don't
Right.
know that we need to define separate dollar amounts anymore
Right.
for it. Right, yeah. So that's
Okay.
fine, yeah.
Okay,
And just to clarify, are you joining in sub A or B, or just the overall look at it, come up with a plan, definition?
Sub A or
of
B
plan?
on all 3?
Yes.
No, I'm not.
Okay.
okay. Okay. Cindy, you good?
I am.
Okay. EERD budget, this is the Environmental and Economic Research and Development Program. The memo talks about how originally this was set at 1.75% of total revenue. And there was even a panel of people, of experts. I thought that was interesting. I did not know that history. We have set this at about $100,000 a year, and there's a list of projects that we have done. My thought is this budget should increase. I think that the numerous things that we brought up today that need to be researched, again, I think now with this direction, we can be directing staff and this program into getting the research that we really want to see. And maybe that's in addition to, but what's been happening is basically the market has brought EERD ideas to Aptum, and then they've either approved them or not. Some of those may be really valuable, some of those maybe we're not sure what to do with right away. I think that we have the opportunity here to sort of direct some of that research, but I do think it's going to take more funding. I thought your approach, your idea earlier, Chair Bach, of kind of getting that list and what that budget is might actually better support what the budget needs to be set at for EERD. So I'm fine if we want to set a budget right now, or if it actually makes more sense to wait until that comes in. The other caveat would be, we could set the EERD budget and then know that we're going after federal funds and other dollars. We have this much in this pot, and maybe we need more than that, and we're going to have to go find dollars. So, I would increase this. The other consideration kind of goes back to what we talked about with renewables, is whether the staff alternatives are to set this at a certain amount a year, and I almost wonder if it makes sense to set a quad budget. Some of this research we may want done in the first year and the second year, as opposed to just $200,000 per year. So my proposal basically would be to set this at, like, we could either do the, like, 800,000, so that would be alt 2, but instead of 200,000 per year, set 800,000 for the quad. I would be comfortable actually with a little higher than that as well if there's interest, possibly like a $1 million budget for the quad. And then we see how much this research is going to cost and what other sources we need to get. So those are my initial thoughts on EERD. I'll pass it to you, Chair.
So I was sort of at a hybrid of alt 2, but directing staff to identify other potential sources of funding.
Okay.
I think it's an interesting suggestion to set the budget for the quad, but I would have to think about that.
Okay. I've got to take a break on another item too, so
Okay.
if you want to think about that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think
Commissioner
we
Noack?
should keep an annual budget just to, again, keep a better eye on it. And I would stay at 100,000, because if you start to increase the floor, because every dollar that goes into the EERD comes out of incentives, or something else, right? So I would like to keep more pressure on finding other sources, or just using existing sources of funds to do research, rather than having even a doubling the floor to $200,000.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to set a budget when we don't know, even have ballparks of the components that would go into the budget. So that's why I would just stay where we're at until we know more information, and we can change that
Okay.
if we need it. So I'm alternative 1.
Yeah, I thought the MIA comment on this specifically showing, their comment, what I wrote down was Minnesota is spending $5 million a year, and ComEd in Illinois alone is spending $11 million a year, and Evergy in Missouri and Kansas is spending 1%. So there's, that would be like 1% would be $1 million annually. And so that's sort of gauging where others are at. So I think our budget certainly has some room to increase, and as we know, there's a lot going on in the world that would justify increasing this and making sure Focus is ready for the changing technologies that are coming. So I would certainly support an increase. So we can take a short break. I think the question on that then is just whether we want to set a quad goal of 800,000 versus 200,000 a year. I've got another item to come back to, but let's finish out. We've just got one more, and then we'll take a short break. So that's behavioral. There was a good discussion about behavioral programs and the evolution of those and the evaluation of those. I think most of the commenters that opined suggested that we would be at alt 1. I'm supportive of alt 1. I think that there's a number of things that we can be doing that we at the commission don't need to oversee day to day. We're going to set goals. Aptam's got to meet those goals. They're going to have to find cost-effective programs that, don't have free riders. And I think we're at the place now, and behavioral pilots and programs are at the place now where we can just direct them to get the job done. So I'm at alt 1.
I agree.
Yeah, I'm at alt 2.
Okay.
I think we need to keep pilots tend to sometimes get out of control or cost more dollars in a shorter amount of time. So I think we need to keep a tighter eye on that, so I'm at the status quo alternative 2.
Okay. So then let's just take maybe a 5-minute break, Chair?
Okay.
Do you need more than
Oh,
that?
nope.
Okay, I'll just go back to that one
And
item.
just,
Thanks.
So we're coming back to discuss the difference between Alt 3 and Alt 4 on the issue of low-income and qualified income program offers. Right. We don't have an overall motion.
Ready when you are, Chair.
Okay, we're ready. We're back.
Mon looks excited.
Yep.
Jeez.
Okay, we had two open items. The first was on the low-income and income-qualified programs in cost-effectiveness test, and I'm going to join the chair at alternative 4, and that would have the EWG review related to a benefits adder for 60% below, 60% of statewide medium income.
Okay.
And I know Commissioner Nowak, you dissented on that. Okay. but I will join you at alt 4 on that.
Okay.
Okay. And then we had the EERD budget that we just discussed. And I proposed that it be looked at over the full quad of possibly the $800,000 level or another level. Chair?
So I prefer an annual
Okay.
amount.
So you would be at alt 2, and I can join you there to increase the budget to 200,000, and then identify other sources of funding.
Yes,
Our team will have a lot of work to do.
yes.
All right. With that, I think we
Is
are
that it?
through everything.
Did we catch everything?
Did you want to go back to the topic up top that included an EERD option now that you know the EERD decision?
Oh, related to time varying. So we, I think, did sub-alt A and sub-alt C, so I guess it would just be, sub-alt C says it shall be funded, sub-alt A says the delegated commissioner shall determine the appropriate source. So I think it would be more appropriate just to do sub-alt A and not have the EERD maybe designated.
But this is the one that specifically we want to know what the budget is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Consistent with that discussion,
Yep.
right?
So-
I'm fine with A and C, continuing to be at A and C as well.
So I would wait until we
Wait.
see what the budget is.
All right.
And then we can talk about,
Yeah.
So maybe no
And C.
sub-alternatives at
Yeah.
this time?
Sorry, which one?
We're on page 31,
The
time varying value.
Oh, yeah, number 4.
So we would not pick a sub-alternative at this time until we see a budget.
correct, correct. Yes.
Okay.
You fine with that?
And I'll just, we don't have a general one, but I'll just move that, just to process that, there's not a separate order that comes out, but that we direct staff to continue with the planning and processes consistent with, in quad 4, consistent with our discussion today.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, that concludes our official business for today. The next open meeting is scheduled for Thursday, August 11th, 2022 at 10:30 a.m.
Move we stand adjourned until August 11th.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Sorry.
Did you announce